Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with the Witherslack Group, experts in special education and care, and John Catt Educational, leading publishers of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. Enjoy the podcast.
So hi there and welcome to a much belated and technically difficult uploading show with me, Ben Poland, and my co-host will be Adam Spence. How you doing there, Spence? You okay?
Yes, thank you, Brent. Oh, crikey, what a stressful start to the show.
And you're remind me, what is it that you actually teach?
Well, actually, I haven't taught ICT for a while, but I do have a finger still in the iMedia pot at the minute for the last time this year. But you know, that's live TV, isn't it? That's not live TV. God, can you imagine us doing that? It'd be even worse, wouldn't it? Live
Radio.
live radio. Oh,
but we got
so, how's your week been, Brand?
I still haven't planted 423s yet, but I have a grand plan which I'll talk later about. So yeah, busy week as always. A bit more data to put in, lots of mock exams for the year 11s, and God bless them. They were it's like when you give kids mock exams for the first time, they're always rabbits and headlights, and sort of some can cope, and then some come out, completely sort of stunned by it. And it's a hard thing. Sometimes the mock exams, I think, are worse than the real exams. So it's a hard thing to pick them back up off the canvas and sort of get them back on the horse again. So that was a tough week for our year 11s. But yeah, same old week in education. Pleased to a certain extent about the budget. So we'll have a chat about that in a minute. It was interesting. I think it was flattering to deceive. I think just enough to get the wolves off our back as regards school funding, but not spectacular. But again, the headlines were a bit of spin on, education's a big winner out of this. And when you kind of go through the minutiae of the details, you can see that the political side of this is different from the actual reality on the ground. So we'll sort of have a little dissection of it, because I think there are winners and losers in it. And I think there's a definite narrative. But equally, it's a lot better than hoped. Maybe they did a job of lowering expectations, so to generally then sort of give us a little bit of a breath of sort of relief. Because I felt a little bit of relief when I saw the headline figures, and I thought, okay, education's not going to be cut. In real terms, there is cuts, but in comparison to others, I think we're okay. But is okay good enough? And this is the thing, isn't it? Is just surviving and doing okay actually good enough when we're dealing with the futures of our children? And I haven't felt that okay and surviving has been good enough for a long time in education. So I think the ambition level is different for me and to the current people in charge of the country, because I think their ambition for the children might be different from my ambition to the children, and maybe the children's ambitions for themselves. And I don't think there's a definite match up with the type of funding and where the funding's going to actually where the children's getting the money. So what about yourself? How was your week?
Yeah, it's been good. I think kind of, mock exam marking, I think probably is on a lot of people's radar at the minute. Getting kind of data in kind of early, and again we're seeing those gaps. I think that's the big thing that everyone can pick up on, is those gaps that from COVID are starting to really show in the data as we're marking. And that's really interesting, thinking about the budget. Does that 2.3 billion get anywhere near to covering any of those kind of COVID gaps or gaps in kids' education? I just don't think it comes anywhere near, really. I think it covers the costs of inflation, energy, and those types of things, but I don't think really it covers any of the gaps that need to be filled over the next couple of years, which are going to be huge, and they're going to continue to grow. And that's my worry about the 2.3 billion. Yes, there is some new money there, but it's nowhere near enough that's to cover those huge literacy gaps that we see in education particularly, and they're only going to get worse as those younger children who were maybe born during COVID,
Yeah.
in reception during COVID, and in early years education. And as they kind of come through the system, those gaps are going to have to be rectified. But what was pleasing, I mean, it was pleasing actually hearing the Chancellor really talk up education, even if the money itself is not enough. It was nice to see an actual, in a statement, a good recognition of education and maybe potentially a plan for the future. He's talking about the skills for the future much more. And I don't think I've ever listened to an autumn statement where there was a good couple of sentences looking at kind of strategical planning for education in terms of the skill set required for the future economy. So that was interesting, and it brings hope that education at the number 10 and number 11 is on the table, because I think probably from COVID, maybe just before COVID to now, we've had so many different education secretaries.
You're being very kind. You're being very kind.
There's nobody to have that kind of strategic overview of what's going through. So, again,
well, the interesting thing to pick up on that is further education and colleges were absolutely livid, especially colleges. You only mentioned the word college once. And you sort of think about the skills gap we have at the moment, and you think of the Govian agenda, the whole idea of, essays and baccalaureates and shoving kids into academic subjects. That's monumentally failed now because we have a skills shortage. And yet, we have society saying we don't want to take migrants over from foreign countries, but those people probably have skills that our students don't have. And it's a horrible thing, isn't it? When you get people saying, let's train up our own. Well, actually, we've not trained up our own. The vocational sector hasn't had the funding. The higher education sector, the college sector hasn't had the funding. Now, universities cry foul, don't they? They say, oh, we've not had funding this. They're asset rich. They are really asset rich. Yeah. But if you look at university lecturers, they haven't had the funding. So you've got money's there at some places, but it's not in other places. And there's a disconnect between, it's funny you say about policy. I don't think they have a long-term strategic policy when it comes to education. I think if you take I think if you take a child from 4 years old to 18, their whole life is one big educational experiment. Yeah. And if you take countries like Estonia, you look at the PISA league tables, I think Britain is just, it's all over the shop when it comes to education. I've been teaching 18 years in England, and I've used to make comparisons with, say, for instance, the Northern Irish education system. I could go back to my old school, and there wouldn't be that many differences. Similar, some teachers, more in the community. There's a consistency in places like that. When England, the postcode lottery, the education system needs, I think, a whole root and branch and a whole deep discussion about what is the purpose and function of education in the UK. And it's funny picking up a couple of the conversations the last couple of days on education. The private versus public education has been reignited, and I know that conversation is going to come up on Tuesday night with Lucy after the Etonians' sort of misogynistic comments towards some of the state schools. And definitely you can see there is some favoritism towards certain schools. There was a bit of a scandal over VAT and whether, that more children their parents will want to send them to the private school. And there's one thing that always annoys me about that argument is like, the teachers are better in private schools. And what are you trying to say? That I'm second class? And that really grates on me because it makes me feel like a second class teacher teaching in a second class part of the country. And when I look at regional funding, I'm tired of feeling like that. I'm tired of trying to, ironically, level up. You know what I mean? Override, poverty, override social settings, override the industrialization of the places like the Midlands, and override sometimes the children's own perceptions of themselves in a Carol Dweck kind of way, but yet have the government not back me up with top class facilities. You know what I mean? With the funding that's needed, and yet money's been thrown at parts of education. You're leveling up Zara's got a great school, the Michaela College, fantastic, it's brilliant, well done to her, but could that be done in Durham? Could that be done in East Midlands? Could that be done in Merseyside? Can that be done around the whole country? But that's the problem. If you have to do that around the whole country, you're going to need to have honest funding around the whole country where it's needed and targeted. And the gap just keeps getting bigger. It really does just keep, and the statistics keep showing that. The gaps keep getting bigger. And it's almost, I worry that this government's going to use education almost in a Blairite type of way of, the way he used education, 50% goes to university. That's this sort of targeting of middle class voters. As opposed to education being an altruistic thing of we want every child to be educated. I have the cynicism now that they're only going to make policies that seem to be vote winners. So what do you think? Do you think that's true, or am I just being an old cynic?
Well, as I said, let's give him his dues. I mean, he's only been in post. As we said, we've had so many different ministers in so many different positions over the last just 6 weeks almost, haven't we? It's very difficult, and there's a question mark over Gavin Williamson's performance when he was Education Secretary at the time. But I mean, the difference is that now is that we do need to have some kind of growth agenda, and that growth has got to come from the skill set of the school leavers. And so they've kind of backed themselves in a corner with this, where they do need to now look at education and actually think it's not good enough for students to leave school without a modern skill set that is actually going to have a direct impact on the growth of the UK economy. So now those two things are more interlinked. I think they will really look at a strategic pathway for students and really kind of consider it. Because if you think really, there hasn't been that much difference. My daughter just started secondary school, and I don't think there's that much difference between what she's doing and what I did. I left school in 1997. We're in a completely different environment, completely different world.
Well, I think the levels, if you look at assessment, that's different. GCSEs, no coursework. No coursework in some subjects is absolutely criminal.
That's just fiddling with the methodology, isn't it? But the actual content and the actual kind of what they're doing, is almost exactly the same. It's almost identical. There's a tweak here, and there's a development of coursework in this one and exams in this one. But at the core of it, the actual kind of what a child leaves education is, I don't think has changed in a couple of generations really. We are children. I mean, when did the national curriculum start? 1990.
Late 80s, early 90s, wasn't it? There was a definite standardization then. But that's the thing. I didn't have a national curriculum when I was a child. My primary school is where I was made. And that primary school, of course, I had the 11 plus at the end of it. And I failed my 11 plus because my primary school was set up to educate me in life, learning, and the love of learning. And I had my child's parents' evening recently, a 7-year-old, and all they wanted to tell me how well she would be prepared to pass a test. And I'm thinking, where's the life skills? Where's the broader? I want her happiness, her well-being. I want her enjoying learning. At my 4-year-old, I had a cracking daddy moment. It was like something out of Bluey. I had a cracking daddy moment this morning when my daughter says, "Can I read this book to you?" 4 years old, and she came to me, and she's only in school a couple of weeks, and she came to me. She's like, "Daddy, can I read this to you?" And she was forming the sounds. And she was forming the sounds that she'd learned at school. And there and then I thought to myself, thank you, primary school. You guys are amazing. And she could read. So my daughter this morning, for the first time, had witnessed her actually reading independently. And it was priceless. It was absolutely priceless. She read it 3 times. And I recorded it for posterity and sent it to her grandmother. But then this is the thing I realized is, when I got a really cracking primary school education, and there wasn't as much funding in a sense, but it was about the cultural capital. I was going to go to university. I was working class. My parents had drive, had motivation, but they could have sent me to a good school within a 20-mile radius. There was good schools everywhere. And yet I grew up in a working class area in the middle of the Troubles, and yet our local schools were well funded, better funded and better organised than what I've been teaching in England in the last 20 years. And that's not me having a go. That's just the difference of society. I come from a society that values education, and people strive and work hard, and we have a brain drain because of it, and that's why I'm here. But I see the same thing being replicated. The difference is I just don't see that education gets, I think, enough credit. I think too much criticism of teachers. I don't think the value of education is thought of as highly as it should be. And all it is people want results. I don't think they want the value of it. And if you take adult education, they have cut lifelong learning, funding for lifelong learning. And adult education, I think that's an absolute criminal thing, because people should be learning all the way through their lives, evolving, changing into careers. And I think the government should be encouraging that. And again, it's very short-sighted, because we had a shortage of truck drivers recently, didn't we? With those scandals last year about not having skills there, and we have massive, that was causing supply chain problems because we hadn't trained enough certain people. And you think, well, how can we train enough people when there's no incentive for people to be retrained, because there's no training colleges out there who've got enough funding? So I think that the whole thing needs a really good look at, and it's not just about throwing money at it. It's about what education does for society, and it's about valuing it. And lastly, it's about the fact that the statement never mentioned nothing about the teacher's pay and about college pay and about any of the pay whatsoever. So they completely sidestep the obvious white elephant is, what are they going to do about retention? They completely ignored any of those demands about retention and teacher numbers, TA numbers. So they had a little figure of, they got a couple of billion in there. Education spending's increasing slightly, but that was it really. And then people move on, and they can then say at the dispatch box, oh yes, we haven't cut education funding. But for me, it's a sticking plaster over a gaping wound. Really, that's all it is. It's a temporary quick fix on top of temporary quick fixes. How many sticking plasters do you have to put over the gaping wound before the blood just keeps gushing out? And that's what I feel we're at with education at the moment. It's a patch-up job, and really it needs a bit more vision and a more strategic overview of actually an honest conversation with society. Because you look at 11% money, 11% of that budget, 11% increase in pensions. There's 11% increase in pensions. And you sort of say to yourself, why is that? Why is that above and beyond? And a lot of people who are working parents feel as if they've been lost out on that budget. And you say that they are parents of young people who themselves have just gone through the likes of university. They're being squeezed, and they're putting their children through schools. And a lot of these parents now are having to contribute towards their schools as well. So I think there's a definite squeeze and a definite cynicism where they're putting the money in order to play a game. And I think education should be above that. So that's my thoughts on that. If you want to pick up anything out of them, or are you okay with that? Yeah, it's that kind of how you're held up in high esteem. I mean, because at home, like, the teacher is a person of, and it still is, don't get me wrong, it still is, in England, but there's something more about it. There's more prestige. There's more, education is, it's almost like I was given a kind of the immigrant mentality that you have towards education, a kind of overriding the cultural situation, and it's that cultural capital. So, reading, my mother would always be pushing and pushing and pushing, and yet they're very pretty much straightforward working class people. Dad's a plasterer, mum's a housewife. But me and my two brothers were going to university. That was non-negotiable. That is, and I had 24 cousins, and I had 24 cousins, 22 out of 24 went to university from that background, because it was not just expected of us, it was competition. We had to fight. We had to almost instill an attitude. And it's pure Carol Dweckism. And that's when I first read Carol Dweck, it just absolutely nailed that educational philosophy, nailed it. And I've always tried to replicate that in areas where I've taught. The problem is I kind of feel as if I'm ice skating uphill sometimes, because you're in isolation, a teacher trying to drive these children, but you're working with one hand tied behind your back, because you look at the classrooms, and I've done British schools internationally. I've done the connecting classrooms with the British Council about 10 years ago, and I went out to Dubai, UAE, and they were apologizing for their school building, which was 15 years old. And I was like, showing them ours and going like, sorry about this. This is 60 years old. It's got asbestos in the ceiling. It's got more leaks than the Titanic. And you think, this is Britain. This is one of the most powerful countries in the world. And, and we've got education facilities and it was flipped because they expected us to be so advanced and everything. And we are in many ways, but I just feel a managed decline is how I would sum it up. There's just a feeling of just, it'll do, it's good enough. It'll do, it's good enough. and a lack of drive and motivation. And I don't always agree with Catherine Balsaminga, but I do like that drive that she has, and I think she's got a point that we need people with that kind of drive to push. And Adam alluded to that drive to push education way back up the agenda, that the future generation need to be kept, because I think, I'll be honest with you, we're going to lose a lot of our brightest and best because they just they'll do what you've done yourself, ironically. They'll go off to other countries because they'll get fed up with it, and they'll fed up with the taxes. They'll get fed up with the moaning. They'll just get fed up with the fact that they don't get valued. And I think they'll leave. I think they'll take their skills.
Yeah. Is Adam still there? Adam, are you there? Adam, I'm just suggesting that you exit and then re-enter for me, and then recall in. That would be a good idea if you can't hear us.
In the meantime, I think it's a good time to do our news and our sponsors, and then we'll have a quick chat when we come back about England. If you want to join in that one, Tom.
Happy days.
This episode of Teachers Talk Radio has been made possible with support from Witherslack Group, the UK's leading provider of SEN education and care. They're here to support you too through an ever-growing offer of free resources, including webinars, podcasts, articles, and events aimed at supporting teaching professionals like you. Visit their website at www.witherslackgroup.co.uk to find out more.
If you're listening to this, then we know we share one thing in common: a passion for the type of outstanding education that every child deserves. That's what makes us the leading provider of specialist education and care. We need people like you to help us achieve even more. With us, you'll be given all the resources and support you need, offered a clear path to career progression, and be rewarded with some of the best salaries and benefits the industry has to offer. We are Witherslack Group. If you'd like to find out more, we'd love to hear from you. Visit www.witherslackgroup.co.uk/careers and be part of our future.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
With the World Cup due to begin, TES magazine reveals why some schools won't be screening games during school time. The competition, held in Qatar, is the subject of much concern from some school leaders, worried about the ethics of showing games held in a country with a poor record when it comes to human rights. England play one game against Iran during school hours, but whilst many school leaders have chosen to show significant games in the past, some are choosing not to do so this time. FIFA's choice to host the tournament in Qatar has been controversial from the outset because of the country's laws on homosexuality and its treatment of migrant workers. Some heads have said that showing the game would be at odds with lessons on diversity and equality. Not all leaders share the same view, and some schools will show the game, but will have what is described as age-appropriate discussions about the ethics of the tournament alongside. Decisions of this nature are always left to individual school leaders, and as debate about the tournament continues, the only real certainty is that this World Cup will be remembered for its controversial hosts, if nothing else. The last week has seen many schools participate in activities to mark Anti-Bullying Week. To further acknowledge the impact bullying can have on young people and their families, the government's Education Hub has published an article laying out what they're doing to help combat bullying in education. This support has largely been in the form of government grants to fund projects and organisations who do important anti-bullying work. This has included further funding for the Diana Award, a recognised anti-bullying programme, the Anti-Bullying Alliance, a new programme to prevent and tackle bullying through quality RSHE education, the Anne Frank Trust to continue the different but the same project, diversity role models, developing intervention materials for schools, and Equaliteach to support multi-academy trusts or local authorities to create change. Full details of all the projects and the funding can be found on the .gov UK website, as well as in the Preventing and Tackling Bullying Guidance. The Scottish Government will launch an online national discussion on Scottish education the week beginning the 21st of November. Children, young people, parents, carers and teachers are being encouraged to take part by registering for events. Those who register will be able to talk directly to the independent facilitators, Professor Alma Harris and Professor Carol Campbell. The discussion was first launched in September, but in order to ensure as full a discussion as possible, the online events have also been launched. So far, the discussion has received 3,500 responses, and feedback will be open until the 5th of December. The Schools and Academies Show 2022 saw the Chair of Ofqual, Ian Buckham, discuss plans for exams and grading for 2023, as well as considering the future of exams, assessment and the use of technology. In his speech, he made it clear that exams and other formal assessments that are like exams give students the fairest chance to show what they know and what they can do. He cited feedback from students, parents and teachers, which he said was overwhelmingly positive, particularly about the return to normal exams in 2022 after the difficulties of the pandemic. Whilst exams in 2023 will see a return to pre-pandemic grading, safeguards will be put in place to ensure no pupil is disadvantaged. This will be the same as those put in place for the 2017 series when pupils sat the reformed GCSE and A-level qualifications for the first time. He went on to speak about the impact of digital tech and described it as when, not if, there would be a greater use of it in high-stakes exams. He did, however, acknowledge that a move to greater digital assessment can only come about through joint working across a range of partners and stakeholders, so as not to experiment with young people's futures. A full transcript of the speech can be found on the DFE website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to look at smartwatches. For those of you that don't know what a smartwatch is, it's basically a watch that has the ability to connect to your phone, enhancing the experience of the owner's smartphone by delivering notifications and controls via an interface, which shows more discreetly and allows the user to decide whether they need to get their phone out or not. This is a real bonus for teachers, as a lot of schools have no phones policies, making it difficult to be contacted during the day. Some smartwatches also can stand alone without the need for a short-range phone connection, as they've got built-in cellular or Wi-Fi capability, extending the range of connection, allowing the phone to be left at home. Although this can be useful, you need to bear in mind that there are additional costs for this, and answering calls makes you look like you're on an episode of Star Trek talking to your wrist unless you have headphones, and replying to texts can be tricky using the watch interface. That being said, one of the most powerful features of smartwatches is the ability to use contactless payment with them, a real time saver and also peace of mind. A downside of contactless payment using smart devices is some payment machines, in particular parking meters, only accept cards. This needs to be kept in mind when travelling around. So, what is the best? Well, that depends on the phone you currently have. It isn't really about the best, it's about compatibility. If you want an Apple Watch, you need to have an Apple phone. Android allows more options and also can be considerably cheaper. You need to ask yourself a few questions to decide what's best for you. Here are the questions I'd ask when considering a smartwatch. What do I want it for? If it's to see notifications from my phone, could an activity tracker be what I'm after? Compatible with all mobile phone platforms, there is a reduced control interface, but for around £50, alongside tracking your activity, you can see notifications without the need to get your phone out. What is the battery life like? Will it last until you get home to charge it? What's the display like? Will you be able to see it at a glance? What if you get messaged while pointing at a pupil's work? Will they see it? Can notifications be adjusted so you are not accidentally sharing? Is it noisy? Can you silence it? Can you switch it to vibrate? And finally, some phone contracts allow you to add on extra devices. Will it be cheaper to do it that way or to buy it outright? As always, I'd love to hear your favourite teaching tech. Do you wear a smartwatch? Let us know at TTR 2022. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
So that's quite interesting. The 2 Minute Tech. We're going to have to get a policy about the old smartwatches, because we have children now potentially recording teachers in their smartwatch. So that's a little bit of a grey area, isn't it, of teachers being recorded in lessons without their awareness. And I had a student said to me, he's like, "Sir, can I record your lesson on their smartwatch?" And goes, "I want to play it back because they enjoyed my lessons." And they're a student that would ironically want too, just because they enjoy the lessons rather than there was something cynical. But they've been, that made me think we probably need to think about this in the future. And I know that comes to exam season, that smartwatches have to be handed over at the start of exams. So sign of the times, isn't it? It's not a mobile phone any longer; it's a smartwatch. But another news story I wanted to pick up on was yesterday was Gianni Infantini, the Italian leader of FIFA, who lives in obviously the Middle East, and he came out with a really interesting 1 hour monologue, rant, stroke defense of Qatar and the World Cup. And I think his general point was understood, but he kind of lost the room a little bit with some of his comments about hypocrisy and about Europe, for 3,000 years of what they've done, and should be apologized for 3,000 more. It's an interesting, it falls into the kind of current context of the discussion that people are having about history, which I know the likes of Tom and myself, we're in the middle of that, being educators of history. But what was interesting about it was I did pick up a couple of threads, especially for education. We had a really good debate last night on Teachers Talk Radio about should the children be able to watch the match, which was one of our news stories there. And my take on it is, I mean, as an Irishman, it's going to be interesting. I think the children should watch the match. It's a fine line between patriotism and nationalism, but supporting your country in a World Cup, it should be something that everybody should get behind. And I know that I'm speaking to Adam about it, that some of my favorite childhood memories was Italian 90. And Italian 90 was absolutely fantastic. And Jack Charlton, as a Republic of Ireland supporter, Jack Charlton was just like God. The Jack Charlton team of 1990. I can remember David O'Leary scoring that penalty, Packy Bonner jumping up and down. But then again, a lot of my friends, who are England supporters, would tell me that they remember fondly, Gazza's tears, Lineker scoring the goals, England getting to the semi-finals, in the same way that a lot of my friends who are England supporters would have remembered the hand of God and also the dribble by Maradona. These are memory makers. These are, I think, very important to a generation of young people coming through about identity. So I get why some people would not want to celebrate the World Cup because of the issues with Qatar. And I think there's a lot of teaching around that and around, what we have with as regards slave labor and the issues about how we deal with, colonialism and decolonization within curriculum. But I don't think it does any harm, and in my opinion, and some might disagree, and this is going to be very ironic coming from an Irishman to say it, but I actually think the children should be allowed to watch their national team. I think if this was other countries, and if this is Sweden or Denmark or other countries, I don't think there would be the same issue. I don't know why, but it seems to be a bit loaded. I don't see any reason why. Adam, what do you think yourself? I mean, would you agree with those memories, or would you disagree, or are you going to agree with an Irishman that you should be supporting England?
Well, who can't agree with you, Brent? But I just think that just finished watching the Channel 4 documentary on the World Cup Italia 90, and although it comes from a kind of cultural perspective in terms of hooliganism, it also has those great memories for me of the group stages going into Italia 90, and particularly the cultural significance of how football moved into the more public consciousness when Gazza's tears. And it was interesting, one of the commentators was saying on that programme how those tears actually brought emotion into the game and actually moved it from actually a very one-sided male masculine sport into a more empathetical emotional state. And I thought that was really interesting from a sociological point of view. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, 1990 was my first World Cup memory, and and it's the World Cup that kind of stays with you. I think you first. So I think those students who are watching it in year 7 tomorrow, if their school is lucky enough to kind of show it, I think it'll have a kind of quite a really big impact on you. But you've also made comments there about the wider educational benefits of the World Cup, highlighting these key areas that, there are still issues in certain countries around LBGT, slave labor, and those things still happen, and it's worth just kind of bringing them up. And I think there's hopefully someone can put together a really good PHSRE lesson on this, or citizenship lesson on this, because I think that's what these things have always done to me. And I was, me and my daughter were putting our wall chart up last night, and just that kind of conversation about where places are in the world, and and she was saying kind of where's Croatia and this type of thing, and then before we know it, we're having a conversation about Yugoslavia. We're talking about those Balkan Wars. We're talking about Czechoslovakia, and those them getting the split between Czech Republic and Slovenia, and those types of things. You kind of, I think, I know I've kind of taken it for granted that these things are in the public sphere and consciousness, and actually they're not. They kind of, but we just forget about them, and news cycles move on so quickly that we just forget to kind of re-engage with them. But they were particularly kind of the Balkans War, and those types of things were kind of a really big thing in my early life. As a kind of when I was in school, these were things we talked about in the playground all the time, and there were genuine concerns about these kind of barbaric wars that were happening at the time. And
See, it's interesting that, because one of the things that I never picked up until recently was the significance of West Germany 1990.
That's right, yeah.
You know what I mean? That's
well, my wife said that straight away. It still takes you by surprise when it says England, England, West Germany go to penalties, and it really does kind of jolt you back into that kind of world of, oh yeah, West Germany.
Or CCCP on the jersey.
Those kind of famous. So I think the World Cup does that. So my opinion is that schools should embrace the World Cup, because there's so many cross-curricular links that can come out of it if it's done really well. If it's just sat in the hall, just watching a game. There's obviously a kind of an entertainment point to that, but I think kind of if it leads on to some assemblies during the World Cup, leads on to some good PHSRE lessons, leads on to good communications good kind of conversations and debates during form time. I mean, it's like pupils are in their element when they're given a good topic, and and it's the conversation we just had last night, actually, when I was discussing some of these teams, is there's some parts of the countries that just some countries of the world that just aren't represented very well with the World Cup.
No,
and you look at the teams that are in it; they're largely again kind of I guess kind of whites of some description. Do you mean of some?
The powerful nations, aren't they?
Powerful nations, There's very few of those kind of. Asia, for example. I mean, you think about in terms of population. India, China.
Not really there, are they?
They're not really there, but they will. But that's the most. If you're thinking about having a competition that brings the world together,
but then
it's
that's
kind of
the Olympics, isn't it?
It's sad that a lot of the world's population aren't represented.
But that's the Olympics for that, though. And then something about football and nationalism that always irks me a little bit. And again, it's like your Swedes, your Danish, those Scandinavian countries, your Icelands, all the rest of it. Their fans go there, and hopefully there doesn't seem to be that vibe this time. But it's funny when the nations that are hosting it are like your Russias or your Frances or your Germanys that have got this sort of deep historical power, significance, this old empire that does seem to be more trouble. It'd be interesting to see if Qatar, being almost like a completely neutral country, and obviously the debate about alcohol and everything else, that might be a different type of tournament. But the sociologist in me is quite fascinated about that. Almost, I've never known in 20 years I've lived in England a tournament with such not low expectations, but is it the time of the year? Is it overloaded? Is it the lack of identification with the team? There doesn't seem to be the same vibe are the same kind of. I don't see the white and red flags out. I don't see the England song out. I don't see the cultural significance in the same way that, John Barnes was doing his thing with New Order, or is it me just looking for something with rose tinted glasses and nostalgia looking back? I don't get the vibe that the country's behind the team. Is it because of the economic problems? Is it because, and even the other day when I turned around to the children and said, do you want to watch the England match? And they sort of just looked at me quite sort of like not bothered, half of the kids. And they were sort of, a lot of them were happy probably to get a bit of time off doing lessons. And I drilled into that, and I asked some children honestly, and I says, do you just want time out of your lessons, or do you genuinely want to watch the match? And there was thirds. There was a third who genuinely wanted to watch the match. There was a third who were like, okay, it's a couple of hours off lessons, I'll have that. And there was another third who were like, it's the last thing in the world I want to do. I'd rather want to do something at school. I'm here to learn. Or, as I give them the option, they're going to be going out with me and planting some trees.
Yeah, that's good.
I
mean, I think in terms of promotion, I think kind of the general idea is the criticism, not turn it into a kind of football podcast for 5 minutes, but I think part of the reason is that Gareth Southgate has made a deliberate play to lower, expectation, lower the kind of media frenzy that goes around the team. Because I think in the past, particularly the England team, has had all this hype around it. You think about the World Cups with Capello and Sven-Goran Eriksson, it became a complete circus, and the players weren't able to concentrate at all. So I think he's doing a lot of that kind of protection. But unfortunately, what that means is then there isn't any kind of, fanfare building up to the World Cup. I think also we're just not used to having a World Cup at this time of year, are we?
Yeah.
It feels like it's a beer garden type thing, isn't it? I did listen to one podcast I thought was quite funny where they said what's going to happen in fans' parks when England score. There'll be like third-degree burns. Everyone throws up the mulled wine rather than the carling.
I don't know. I think
can you
they'll
imagine
still be
being covered in eggnog?
But it is,
as the goal going.
But there was another aspect of it to me and it goes back to the comments made by the FIFA president about the money and the type of World Cup they wanted. And I was looking and I couldn't believe this. This is true. An England World Cup jersey, the official World Cup jersey for the World Cup, with all the little bits of stuff on it for the World Cup, retailing at the moment for, get this, £114.99.
Nice.
Now, a normal bog standard England home jersey, very similar to the World Cup jersey, that's £75, £54 for a child, and the cost of living crisis. Now, don't get me wrong, they're doing a nice plug for it's made from recyclable materials. Great, but it's hardly accessible for children in a cost of living crisis that your England jersey, let's be honest with you, you could paint a white t-shirt with a couple of blue highlighters on it. You've pretty much got you could paint the element onto a white shirt and you pretty much, it's a pretty basic, and it's a nice jersey because of that. Being England jerseys, it's one of those eternal jerseys. It doesn't have to change too much because it is, it shouldn't be changed too much. I think I'm a big fan of your football jerseys being, especially, if it's like an Ireland jersey, should always be green and none of them messing around with the green. You want a nice solid green and maybe a little white or a little something else in there. But, that's the same with England jerseys. So they shouldn't really be having to pay £75 as an adult and £114.99. I don't know why they do the £114.99. Why the 99 pence is there, I don't know. Because
I mean, I do believe though that this is a conversation that's always had. I remember having the similar conversation for Italia 90 when I wanted the shirt. My parents kind of, earwigging into a conversation. My parents talking about how expensive the official kit was at the time. So I think there's always that element to this, and there's always going to be profits going to be made at this point that always seem kind of
knew
over the top.
You always knew there's a kid in your class who had, and in my generation, it was the same generation as you. There was the kid who had the Lazio jersey because of Gaza. There was a kid who had an there was a friend of mine who had like 6 jerseys, and there's me with my old, Crown paints Liverpool jersey, that lasted 5 years.
Yeah, well, to be fair, what a classic kit that was. I mean,
Oh,
that was one of the great kits, the Crown paints.
Oh man, but that's the thing. You're right. It always was a difficult thing. Buying a football jersey was a big spend, and still is. But when you're getting to that point where it's £54, and then the socks, and get this, shorts are 42 quid for a pair of shorts, and £14 for a pair of socks. But here's my point. Here's the kicker. They're made in Thailand. And we're about to go, oh, it's terrible what they're doing in Qatar, slave labor. And I think there's a definite bit of geography and sociology lessons and psychology and all. There's a couple of lessons in there. Business studies as well. Yeah. I mean, and I know that the company, I can't mention them, I'm not going to mention the company, but the company that has featured a lot in my old geography, case studies for, I'm not saying exploitation, but it's a system that we have in the world where, things are made in one place for other people. And I think that was a point that he was trying to make is, we're all those companies that are criticising are actually benefiting from the World Cup. And here we are in a cost of living crisis where people would love to support their football team. And that's the other aspect, people would want to, you take about kids being off school. And we saw during the pandemic, this is how it links to education, that we shouldn't be having days off. Attendance is important. And it is important we have the kids in school. And I think, if schools are going to say, look, the kids are having a couple of hours for an England match, that it isn't just we're taking the half a day off. Because for me, that undermines the value of education. It should be phrased, this is an important thing, we're supporting the country. And we did something like that a couple of years ago, 2018, where we had the kids making an England flag. They went out and we got drone. It was brilliant. And again, this is coming from an Irishman. I'm quite humble about it. And I stood up above and took photographs of above, looking down. And we had all the kids wearing either white or red. And we worked out the proportions, and we had them make an England flag where they waved in England. So you had a moving England flag made up of like 400 to 500 children, and it was great fun. And that made the regional. I think it might have made the national media. And that's the kind of thing where memory maker. What did you do for Euro 2008? That memory will live on. And you think to yourself, that was community, that's identity, that's part of the cultural capital, that's inclusivity. You have people from, not even from England there, you have people from all around the world who come into our school who are then taking part in that. And I had to look at that and thought, that's community, that's it. That's what I remember as a kid. But I just don't see that feeling at the moment isn't there, is it?
No, so I suppose not. But again, these things are sometimes slow burners once everyone's kind of got into the first game. Maybe the first, having this England game so early on is a big one. Going back to this thing about watching this Italian 90 documentary though, I just had no idea. I mean, I knew England played Ireland, and then obviously knew the Cameroon game and the West Germany game, but I had no idea they played Egypt.
Oh yeah, it was. We all played Egypt. We all drawed against Egypt.
Yeah, I think that's probably why it was just so uneventful compared to the other games.
Oh, England Ireland, we should have won actually. The Irish, Lineker doing his poaching thing again. And then it's things like that was probably in '94 for us as well, because we're out in Italy. In New York, scoring against the Italians. You had the Irish and the Italians in New York. I mean, come on! Sometimes it throws these things up, football like that, and that's where it makes these stories, these narratives. And yes, one of those longest running is obviously England, Germany, but you've got so many others. Holland and Germany. Whoa! Remember Rudy Voller?
I think the criticism of the Irish team in the '94. By the time they got to '94,
the heat.
Well, it wasn't that. It's the Irishness.
Well, what they call the Football Association of Ireland was called Find Another Irishman. Yeah, I mean, the documentary and Jack Charlton, and I know you probably watched it. I cried. I am not ashamed to admit that man, and it's something that people didn't realise, is that Jack Charlton, an Englishman going over to Ireland, he actually reclaimed the Irish flag. He reclaimed it from, and I think there's a definite connection with this, say, with England as well, of the nationalism versus patriotism. Jack Charlton made it okay to fly an Ireland flag without people thinking that you were supporting Republicans, for instance. And that's a point that people don't understand, the cultural point. In the same way that I saw in 2018, people were happy to fly an England flag and not have that look of, and I think that's an important thing to teach the next generation. You can be supportive of your country without the kind of, oh, hoo-ah, we won, we get one over. And that's unfortunately, and it's not just that doesn't just happen in England. That happens if you go to Italy, that goes to Germany. Those bigger nations sometimes they aren't as inclusive, or they aren't as, what's the word for it? They go there with that mentality of, and I think there's definitely something that has changed. Possibly, I think Gareth Southgate, I think you're right, had changed in 2018. It's just I'm sort of just a bit disappointed that, like, I kind of want that vibe back again. And this is coming from somebody who's not an England supporter. It'd be interesting to see the difference maybe in Wales. Could you imagine? Would we have this conversation now about Wales getting to their first World Cup, and how the Welsh, and there's a really good message there that came up in our comments there about it's the quality of the players. That's a fair point. You mean Wales is a small country and it's produced a really good crop of quality players. You sometimes get that with some countries like Croatia, Denmark. They're small countries, but sometimes they have a team who've been a team for years and they're brilliant. Romania was like that in the 90s. Bulgaria was like that in the 90s. They just have a crop of players. Belgium, they've got their golden era coming through. But imagine being in those countries and saying to the kids in those countries, when they get to a World Cup for the first time in 60 odd years, by the way, and I don't think it's an interesting one, isn't it? I don't think that this discussion would happen in Wales. I think the whole of Wales would be closing down by their first game, and if that happened. Would you agree, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely. And, to keep this kind of coming back to teaching as well, during the week, it'd be great if people can, share their lessons, or share their assemblies, or share their messages they've had with students during the World Cup, and be interesting to hear the kind of students' perspective on this as well. Especially if you're from some of those kind of smaller countries, and how much it means to you, how much this kind of transcend all the other things when a small country like Wales, gets to a World Cup, and how important that is for their whole national and cultural identity going forward. And it's going to give those countries like a massive boost, in terms of their own confidence, their own ego, as these small nations going forward.
Well, I can't help it, but I'm the underdog, and I just so want Wales to win. So I'm really pleased. The last time England played Wales, we were in school, and everybody was having a go at me, going, "Why aren't you supporting England? Why aren't you supporting England?" I'm going, I'm supporting Wales. I'm supporting the underdog. But you live in England, you don't live in Wales, and they don't understand my mentality. I want to see the small nation do well. Croatia in the last World Cup, there's always that one or two teams. Cameroon, you said in 1990 with Roger Milla. Oh my word! There's always and there's always that story of the underdog, and you find out who these people are, where they've come from, or they might be, for instance, an asylum seeker. They've had to, and I love that sometimes when you delve into these players. It's a shame he's not at the World Cup. Sadio Mane, how much he gives back to his community, how much money. And you get to the real crop, and even you see classy touches from people like, I have to say, this crop of England players are a lot classier and a lot more professional than the previous generation. And I think and going back to education and kids, I think they're better role models. I like what I see with, and the England women, I tell you what, fair play, the England women were absolutely fantastic. And the way they handled the whole tournament, the expectations, and it was interesting how they then said to the men, like, boys, we've shown you how to do it. And I think so. Sport has got that ability, doesn't it? It has that ability to leave a lasting impression and to change outcomes and to literally, and hopefully for the Welsh, they have their version of my 1990 and they get to the quarterfinals. And that could be a motivational boost. And I suppose, I'm going to say, I think the country needs something like this because everything is so depressing. And I think the kids could really too, with an uplifting experience and even a good run of possibly doing well, because just everything's so negative. You can imagine being the young people at the moment just filtering off. And for me, I can say that 1990 thing, when you've grown up where I grew up, and the problems we had to deal with, it was an absolute rescuing factor because there was hope of you could actually do stuff. It really did psychologically change. There's really good books and movies about the snapper, or one of Roddy Doyle's, The Van, isn't it? And you get the Colin Meaney character in the background, and it's just literally nails what it was like. Even the music, I can listen now to Give It a Last Jack and Ole Ole Ole. And we used to play that song on the radio every hour, and I had that on tape. It was worn out. And literally there was that, I don't know, it's very hard to describe it. There was something about it just uplifted the whole society. And I think I hope for a good World Cup. I hope that it's going to be good for our kids. And I just hope, you always pray there's going to be no trouble, no rioting, no silliness, no stupidness, because we do see that other side of it. And it goes back to this lad culture of, we want to get away from that. And I just hope we don't see that type of, as England do well, we hope that they don't. I mean, I was here in 2002 when Ireland lost out to Spain, and I was in an Irish bar in Nottingham, and we lost in penalties. Never forget, Ian Hart missed a penalty. We went out that night and celebrated. Everybody we met went, "You just got knocked out of the World Cup." We're like, well, we're doing all right to be there. We had a bit of fun. That's because, and literally, people think we're weird because we just enjoyed ourselves. We're there for the fun of it. And there's got to be that mentality, isn't it? It's got to be. It's got to be passed down to the children that be proud of your country, enjoy it, but it's got to be done in the right way. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
How do you bring it into schools? I think that's where
Yeah,
teachers come in.
Yeah, I think
Skillfully.
that's our job, isn't it? I mean, the job is to kind of have that kind of, as the tournament starts, is to start kind of, focusing lessons on these things and making them kind of talking points. And I always think kind of, people talk about the lessons, but what about the corridor conversations? What about the playground duty conversations? There's so much to be had all the time with this, isn't there?
The World Cup sweepstake. Who have you got?
I missed the work one. So I'm kind of out of the loop there. We did one as a family, and I think my big team was France. We had a couple. We had a couple, but I do think it's Argentina or Brazil probably.
And that's the odds. Guess who I got? And I didn't get England. I got England last time. I've got the USA. So I'm gonna.
USA are not bad, I don't think.
Yeah, they're in England's group, so I've got the USA in England's group, and I'm going to be supporting Wales in England's group. So I'm going to be. No wonder I'm outside planting trees. I'm keeping a low profile because I can imagine the amount of grief I'm going to get. I was like, and we've got flags, and again, this is lovely with staff room. We've got one of the guys that did the sweepstake, and fair play to him, and he made a big thing out of the draw. And again, it was just a nice thing to do, and he put like a little. He did the Euro 2008, and he always had like a smart comment that came with it, and it was just uplifting. It was good fun. It was good banter. It just lifted the staff room, and it got people talking about what have you got, and it started conversations. And I think it was just a positive vibe. Just changes, almost like they say, a change is as good as a holiday and a bit of a break. So hopefully that's maybe what this is. This World Cup can be a little bit of a break for people, because it has been a couple of years. It's been really tough, and then the economic stuff now. So hopefully there's a good World Cup, and hopefully if England go well, we can start to talk about the football, talk about the tournament, see good examples, role models, and there's always good stories that come out, like the Roger Millers or the unsung heroes. And you get that narrative, and that maybe might do for this generation what those World Cups that we remember did for our generation. And that's what you kind of hope for, isn't it? That it passes on the positive side of it, because I don't remember anything negative about some of those World Cups, because you want to remember the experience, but the shared experience of sitting down with friends of the similar age and going like, where were you in this one? And as I say, I can remember this day when that penalty was scored by David O'Leary. David O'Leary, of all people, scores a penalty. And the absolute euphoric feeling I had what age would I have been? 12, of jumping up and down in the living room, And it just was one of the and running out to the street. There were people dancing in the street like absolute lunatics, and you think it's just you can't recreate that, can you? There's something about that could be really magical for the young people. So I think we have to make sure that we make that a little bit special for them in schools, and our schools. I do remember our schools are making a big thing about it as well. So there is I think an onus on us to I think embrace it. And I know there are some that would go, it's in Qatar, and I'm not going to say they're wrong. I get where they're coming from about the LGBT and everything else, but I'm a big fan of embracing it, and you change things from within. And I think the positivity wins out against the negativity. If you simply say we're not going there because they have this record on things, then it's like we wouldn't be playing Iran at the moment. We have a case to say we shouldn't be playing Iran with what's going on in Iran, but I think playing Iran in the football you then draw attention to what's happening in Iran, and that starts that conversation in the classroom. You say, who are you playing against Iran? Well, actually, what Iran's doing against those young students is wrong, and it starts those conversations. Whereas imagine they were boycotted and Iran weren't there, then you wouldn't have that conversation. So I think there's a possibility there of using that, but it is up to us as skillful educators to try and find ways in, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And it's just about thinking about as your lessons come up this week. I know I will definitely. I've got some lessons coming up on international business. How can we bring that in? That kind of loads of literacy to be had around the World Cup as it kind of comes up as well. Loads of numeracy as well. Think about kind of league tables and scorings and everything else.
Geography.
There's loads of geography. Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that subject.
All right, okay.
There's loads. There's definitely loads to pull out of of a tournament like this, and we haven't mentioned kind of religious studies as well, have we? Or philosophy and ethics and those types of things as well. Could be some really interesting kind of things to come out of that. Come out of there.
Do you think then that there was? Do you think they're being fair to Qatar? Do you think that there's been or is it just a sign of the times that no matter what they put, it's like Robbie Williams has decided he's going to play there, and others have said no. Is it a sign of the times now that it doesn't matter if they, as some say, it doesn't matter where you put it in the world, there's always going to be controversy. If you put like I remember I went to the Olympics in 2000 and I worked at the Olympics. There's a massive thing about the Aboriginal generation, and there was huge moment when one of the Aboriginal runners and she won the 400 meters, and I was in the stadium at the time. And again, it's funny how these things just so stand out. And when she crossed the line, she didn't jump up and celebrate. She just broke down completely. It was such an emotional moment, really was. But then there's they addressed that at that Olympics. They actually went to the point where they said, "This is our Olympics to readdress this. This is what we're going to talk about. This is how we're going to make up for all." There was a definite forgiveness there, where how sport could be used for that, and that's the difference. I'm trying to say with like Qatar. I don't see them transforming, same as Beijing. It's not as if in Beijing when they had the Olympics in 2008, this transformed Brazilian society. Whereas I think South Africa, there was a definite coming together in 2010. So it does work some places. It doesn't work all this. Like the Olympics in England in 2012 were absolutely exceptional, weren't they? They brought the world together. Credit where credit's due. They were fantastic Olympic Games, weren't they? So I think sometimes it has the ability to heal sport and move societies on. And other times I think it's a wasted opportunity, isn't it?
Well, I think there will be waste. I mean, I don't think you can ever do this kind of legacy type games or World Cup that they've often kind of talked about. Although it would be nice. I think that now they're just so expensive, aren't they? So they're so kind of expensive to put on that it's very difficult to get that legacy that they all dream of. But we can, where we can bring legacy in is through the classroom, I think. And having these conversations now, which will stay with the generation kind of going forward.
Brilliant.
But I don't think it's necessarily the individual place that's the problem. As you said, you can criticize any country for anything all the time, can't you?
Yeah.
But it's just about kind of while it's. I mean, it'd be interesting to know. I'm looking for the people like Gary Neville. He'd be an interesting person to follow during the World Cup. Is he going to carry on, bringing these issues up? I wouldn't expect someone like David Beckham to, but if he could do, that would be great. Again, Robbie Williams, David Beckham, you kind of expect them to.
They're outspoken, aren't they? They've got their own minds. Those two.
They do,
Yeah.
but someone like Gary Neville would be really interesting. I mean, there will be people around the fringes who haven't got the big fame. To kind of just make that point. And I'm sure kind of comments will be made. And as you said, the particular England team is, they are quite mature. They are quite well educated lads. And I think and Gareth Southgate will as well. He'll do it very subtly, I think. It won't be kind of obvious.
Yeah.
But I think there will be the comments, there will be the nods to something kind of not working well, or maybe they'll go out and do a visit to something or highlight a particular issue at certain times. It's not so in your face,
No.
It'd be subtle. It'll be
The
well.
armbands, for instance,
Yeah,
they might wear the LGBT plus armband. It's little
it'll be
things,
well thought through. It'll
little
be
gestures. Yeah, yeah,
all these guys have very well targeted, scripted social media accounts that are run by professionals. That there will be ways to make these comments and highlight some of the key issues that our kids can pick up on as the
yeah.
World Cup goes on, and that will keep the kind of conversation going. So I don't think there will be a well, I think as the tournament goes on, I think the Qatarians will realise they can't lock down as much as they are thinking they're going to lock down.
No, well, you can't control everything. You can't control
You're
people,
not going
can
to be able
you?
to
No.
control. Yeah, because it's a World Cup. It's going to be so. I don't know what the figures are. I mean, they're in the hundreds of millions, aren't they? People that
Yeah.
watch it and connect with the World Cup, including kind of our children. And they when they talk about stuff on social media, they talk about it in floods, don't they? They don't just mention it once. It's kind of
No.
it's omni-linked, isn't it, all the time to different media accounts and that type of thing. So
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you for that. So what we'll do now is we have a good sponsor called With a Slack Group, and they're a leading provider of specialist education and care. They need people like you to help them achieve even more. So with a Slack, you've been given some resources and support you need and offered a career path to career progression and rewarded with some of the best salaries and benefits the industry has to offer. They're currently looking for some fantastic career opportunities. You'll find them on www.witherslackgroup.co.uk/careers. Also, we have a couple of new presenters who are obviously doing what Adam and I have done and joined the team of Teachers Talk Radio, which is a bit like the Borg in Star Trek. If you will be assimilated, you will come and join the collective and you will add to the rest of us. And we are in essence, a bunch of volunteers who are teachers of all different places and actually overseas, UK, of teaching age ranges and different experience levels. So it's a really diverse, fantastic team. We've got Poppy and Steve and Reem and Ollie all joining us. And I think Reem had our first show last night, which looked like a really tasty show about politics, which I sadly missed. But if I missed it, I am going to find it and get it caught back on Pod Spaces and Twitter Spaces and where you get your podcasts. And equally, you'll be able to listen back to this on all those places as well. And we'll have edited out our little bit of problems to begin with. So a couple of other things coming up. We have the Sunday Twilight Show with Maud at 5 and the Sunday Late Show with Tom Starkey at 8. And a really good show coming up tomorrow night with Tom himself. He's going to be looking at the future of Oak Academy. And he's got some big hitting guests there, like Dr. Mary Boosted, for instance, from NEU. So that looks like being a really good show and something very, very relevant to a lot of us, especially as we went through the COVID crisis. Lucy and Tuesday's going to pick up on the the Eton kids. And the lively debate will be on that, on the public and private education of what's happened there. So tune in and talk it out with us at Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for your help today, Tom, and thank you to Adam Spence. And it has been the Sunday Lunch Show with me, Brent Poland. Join me again next week where hopefully things will run according to plan. And by that stage, we'll know more about the World Cup. Thank you, guys.
okay, thanks for listening.